Chernobyl, the silent disaster that changed the world. There is a place on Earth that looks, at first glance, almost peaceful. Forests stretch into the distance. Wild animals move freely through the trees. Birds cross the sky above abandoned roads. Grass grows through cracked pavement, and apartment blocks stand silent beneath climbing vines. Can seem from far away like nature has won. But this place hides one of the darkest secrets of the modern age. Beneath the silence, beneath the trees, beneath the empty buildings and rusting playgrounds, there is radiation. Invisible, odorless, silent, and deadly. This is Chernobyl. On April 26, 1986, in Soviet Ukraine, a nuclear reactor exploded and released a poison that could not be seen, smelled, or touched in the ordinary way. It drifted in the air, settled into soil. It entered milk, grass, forests, rivers, animals, and human bodies. Chernobyl was not only an industrial accident. It was a catastrophe of technology, secrecy, human error, political fear, and lies. It turned a model Soviet city into a ghost town. It forced hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. It sent radioactive clouds drifting across Europe. It exposed firefighters, workers, soldiers, miners, pilots, doctors, children, and families to a danger many of them did not understand until it was too late. And it left behind one question that still haunts history. What happens when a government fears the truth more than the disaster itself? To understand Chernobyl, we must begin not with the explosion, but with the dream that came before it. In northern Ukraine, not far from the border with Belarus, the Soviet Union built one of its great nuclear power stations. The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant was not meant to become a symbol of fear. It was meant to be a symbol of strength, progress, modernity, science, control over nature. The plant contained large RBMK reactors, designed to produce enormous amounts of electricity for the Soviet state. To Soviet planners, nuclear energy represented the future. It was powerful, modern, efficient, and proof that socialism could master the forces of the atom. Nearby stood the older town of Chernobyl, a small settlement with quiet streets and a long history. But the true symbol of the nuclear project was a new city built only a few kilometers from the reactors. Pripyat. Founded in 1970, Pripyat was built for the workers of the power plant and their families. It was young, modern, and full of confidence. Engineers, technicians, scientists, teachers, nurses, doctors, and children filled its apartment blocks and schools. It had wide streets, shops, cafes, sports halls, a cinema, a library, a palace of culture, hospitals, schools, and playgrounds. It even had an amusement park with a Ferris wheel, waiting to open for the May Day celebrations. Pripyat was not an ordinary Soviet town. It was a showcase, a place where the Soviet Union could say, "This is the future we are building." The people who lived there had good salaries by Soviet standards. The shops were better stocked than in many other towns. The schools were strong. The city was clean, young, and hopeful. Families walked in the evenings. Children played in courtyards. Young couples planned futures that seemed bright and safe. Life in Pripyat was tied to the power station. The reactor gave the city its purpose. The city gave the reactor its people. And no one imagined that the source of their pride would one day destroy everything they knew. In the spring of 1986, the trees were turning green. The weather was warming. Children were outside. The amusement park was nearly ready. The city was preparing for celebration. But inside Reactor Number 4, a test was being planned. It was supposed to be routine. The operators wanted to test whether the reactor's turbines could continue producing power for a short time if outside electricity was lost. It was a safety test, meant to prove that the system could function during an emergency. But that night, a chain of mistakes began to form. The test was delayed. The reactor was kept running at low power for too long. Safety systems were disabled or ignored. The reactor became unstable. Operators followed instructions under pressure, but they did not fully understand the danger building inside the core. The RBMK reactor had design flaws, some known, some hidden, and some not properly communicated to those who operated it. Under certain conditions, it could behave in ways that were dangerous and difficult to control. And in the early hours of April 26th, those conditions came together. At 1:23 in the morning, Reactor number 4 surged violently. In moments, the machine escaped human control. There was an explosion. Then another. The force was so powerful that it tore open the reactor building and blew away the massive structure above the core. The reactor's heart was exposed to the night air. Graphite began to burn. Radioactive fuel, metal, concrete, and dust were thrown into the open. A deadly cloud rose into the sky. The reactor was no longer a power source. It had become an open wound. 2 workers died almost immediately. They were the first victims of a disaster that would reach far beyond the plant. In the first minutes after the explosion, confusion ruled. Smoke rose from the destroyed reactor. Flames burned across the building. Pieces of radioactive graphite lay scattered on the ground and roof. But many of the men arriving at the scene did not know what they were looking at. Firefighters came quickly. They believed they were fighting an industrial fire. They had no proper radiation protection. No one clearly told them that the reactor core was open. They climbed onto roofs. They dragged hoses through radioactive debris. They stood near materials so dangerous that a few moments of exposure could damage the body forever. They fought the flames with courage. But courage cannot stop radiation. Some began to feel sick. Some vomited. Some grew weak. Their skin burned. Their throats hurt. Their bodies were absorbing invisible death. The firefighters did not run away. They continued working. They stopped flames from spreading to other parts of the plant, and by doing so, they may have prevented an even larger catastrophe. But many of them paid with their lives. In the hours after the explosion, injured workers and firefighters were taken to hospitals. Their clothes were so contaminated that they had to be removed and sealed away. Their boots, gloves, and uniforms became dangerous objects. Doctors tried to help. But this was not an ordinary emergency. Radiation sickness attacks the body from within. It damages the skin, blood, organs, and immune system. It can make a person appear better for a short time, only for the body to collapse later. Some of the men suffered terribly. Their skin blistered and broke. Their bodies weakened. Their organs failed. In the weeks that followed, many of those exposed that night died from acute radiation sickness. Others survived, but never returned to normal life. While this was happening, the city of Pripyat continued to breathe. Only a few kilometers away, people woke up to a strange morning. Some saw smoke. Some saw a glow near the plant. Some heard rumors. But there was no immediate evacuation. No urgent public warning. No full explanation. Children went outside. Families opened windows. People walked through parks. Radioactive particles settled on clothes, hair, skin, grass, benches, rooftops, playgrounds, and sandboxes. Children played in dust that had become poisonous. Mothers pushed strollers beneath an invisible cloud. Men and women went about their day, not knowing that the city itself was being contaminated. By the next day, radiation readings in Pripyat were thousands of times higher than normal. By evening, levels in some places were so dangerous that staying in the city could become fatal. Yet the people were still not told the full truth. The Soviet system moved slowly, secretly, and defensively. The first instinct was to control information, not to warn, not to confess, not to panic the population. Authorities feared disorder. They feared embarrassment. They feared admitting that a symbol of Soviet progress had become a disaster. Finally, on April 27th, evacuation began. Buses arrived in long lines. Residents were told the evacuation would be temporary. They were told to take only essential items, documents, a little food, a few belongings. They were told they would return in 3 days. They did not return. Almost 50,000 people left Pripyat in only a few hours. They left behind furniture, clothes, toys, photographs, family albums, school books, letters, pets, and the ordinary objects of daily life. A city that had been alive in the morning was empty by evening. Apartments remained furnished. Tables remained set. Classrooms waited for children who would never come back. The amusement park never opened. The Ferris wheel became one of the most haunting symbols of the disaster. A wheel built for joy, frozen forever in a city of silence. But the disaster did not stop with Pripyat. The reactor was still burning. Radioactive material continued to rise into the atmosphere. The Soviet authorities faced a terrifying question. How do you fight a fire that is not only fire? How do you contain a burning nuclear core? How do you approach a place where the air itself is dangerous? Helicopters were sent over the reactor. Pilots flew through radioactive smoke and heat. Soldiers dropped sand, clay, boron, lead, and other materials into the destroyed core, trying to smother the fire and reduce radiation. The mission was simple in words, but almost suicidal in reality. The heat rising from the reactor made flying difficult. The radiation was intense. Pilots and crew members became sick. Some began vomiting after repeated flights. Tons of material were dropped into the reactor, but no one could be certain how much was helping. Below the reactor, another danger appeared. The molten nuclear fuel might burn downward through the structure and reach pools of water beneath the plant. If that happened, there was fear of another explosion, one that could spread even more radioactive material. Workers had to enter flooded areas to drain water. They moved through darkness and danger, knowing the mission might save countless lives. Later, miners were brought in to dig beneath the reactor. Thousands worked underground in heat, dust, and radiation. The conditions were brutal. Protective equipment was limited. Many understood they were risking their lives. But they kept working. They became part of a vast army of people later known as the Liquidators. The Liquidators came from across the Soviet Union. Firefighters, soldiers, engineers, miners, pilots, drivers, doctors, nurses, construction workers, volunteers. They fought an enemy that could not be seen. They cleaned roofs, removed radioactive debris, washed buildings, buried contaminated soil, cut down forests, killed abandoned animals, measured radiation, built roads, transported waste, and worked around the destroyed reactor. Some tasks were so dangerous that robots were tried first. Machines were sent onto the roofs to clear radioactive graphite and debris. But the radiation was so powerful that many machines failed. So men were sent instead. They were called bio-robots. They wore protective gear, but often it was not enough. They ran onto the roof for only seconds, sometimes less than a minute. They picked up radioactive debris and threw it over the edge, then ran back before their bodies absorbed too much radiation. But even a few seconds could be dangerous. Each man did his turn. Then another man went. Then another. In this way, human bodies replaced machines. The Soviet Union eventually mobilized hundreds of thousands of liquidators. Their work prevented the disaster from becoming even worse. Without them, contamination could have spread farther. The reactor site might have remained even more unstable. Europe might have faced a broader danger. And yet, many of these people were later forgotten. Some became ill. Some died young. Some struggled for medical care or recognition. Many were never told the true dose of radiation they received. They had been sent into history's most dangerous cleanup operation, and many lived afterward with pain, disability, fear, and silence. At the same time, the Soviet state continued trying to control the story. The news of the disaster did not immediately reach the Soviet public. The first major outside warning came from Sweden. At a Swedish nuclear facility, workers detected unusually high radiation on their clothing. At first, they thought there might be a leak at their own plant. But after investigation, they realized the radiation had come from far away. A radioactive cloud had crossed Europe. The world began asking questions. Only then did the Soviet Union begin to admit that something had happened. Even then, the information was limited, careful, minimized. The Soviet leadership did not immediately tell its own people the full truth. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, did not speak publicly about the disaster until May 14th, nearly 3 weeks after the explosion. By then, radioactive material had spread across parts of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Scandinavia, and beyond. Some governments warned their people. Others minimized the threat. In France, officials were later criticized for implying that the radioactive cloud had somehow stopped at the border. But radiation does not obey borders. It does not stop for flags, governments, or political statements. Chernobyl became not only a nuclear disaster, it became a disaster of truth. The Soviet authorities feared panic. But silence did not protect people. Silence exposed them. In the days after the explosion, May Day celebrations went ahead in some places even though officials knew contamination was dangerous. People marched outdoors. Children carried flags. Families gathered in public squares. The state wanted normality. But radiation was already in the air. It settled into grass. It entered milk. Touched food. It moved into bodies. In Pripyat and surrounding regions, iodine tablets were not distributed in time. Potassium iodide can help protect the thyroid gland from radioactive iodine, but only if taken quickly after exposure. In many places, the delay made it far less useful. Children were especially vulnerable. In the years that followed, thyroid cancer cases rose among children and adolescents exposed to radioactive iodine after the disaster. Other health effects remain debated. The true number of deaths caused by Chernobyl is still uncertain. Official numbers count only direct and confirmed deaths. But the long-term toll is much harder to measure. Radiation can cause cancers years later, can damage health slowly. It can create fear, stress, displacement, and social suffering that statistics do not easily capture. Estimates vary widely. Some speak of thousands, others of tens of thousands. The gap between estimates shows how difficult it is to measure a disaster that spreads invisibly through time. Part of the uncertainty is scientific. Part is political. Part comes from poor records, secrecy, and denial. The human cost of Chernobyl may never be fully known. But what is known is enough. Firefighters suffered. Plant workers suffered. Liquidators suffered. Children suffered. Families lost homes forever. Communities disappeared from maps. Farmers lost land. Animals were abandoned. Forests were poisoned. Entire regions became associated with invisible danger. After the evacuation, an exclusion zone was created around the plant. Villages were emptied. Roads were blocked. People were moved away from contaminated areas. In total, hundreds of thousands were relocated over time. But many more continued living in contaminated regions across Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Some ate food grown in contaminated soil. Some drank milk from animals that had grazed on contaminated grass. Some lived for years with uncertainty. Is this water safe? Is this bread safe? Is this forest safe? Is this illness ordinary? Or is it Chernobyl? That uncertainty became part of the disaster. In the abandoned areas, animals were left behind. Dogs, cats, cattle, and other domestic animals wandered through empty streets and villages. Many waited for owners who would never return. Authorities feared the animals could spread contamination. Special teams were sent to kill them. It was one of the quieter tragedies of Chernobyl. A grief without speeches. Pets left behind by families who thought they would return in 3 days. Then the land itself began to change. One of the most contaminated areas became known as the Red Forest. Pine trees absorbed such high levels of radiation that they turned reddish-brown and died. The forest was cut down and buried. Even today, parts of that area remain among the most contaminated places on Earth. And yet, in the decades after the disaster, something strange happened. Nature returned. With people gone, animals began moving through the exclusion zone. Wolves, deer, boars, foxes, beavers, lynx, birds. Even brown bears appeared again in the region. The absence of humans allowed wildlife to spread. This created a strange paradox. A poisoned land became a refuge. Not because it was safe, but because people had left. The animals are not free from radiation. The soil is not clean. The plants are not untouched. But life found space in the ruins. Chernobyl became both a warning and a mystery. A place where human failure created emptiness, and emptiness allowed nature to return. Meanwhile, the destroyed reactor had to be sealed. In 1986, workers built a massive concrete and metal structure around Reactor Number 4. It became known as the Sarcophagus. It was built quickly under dangerous conditions by people working in short shifts near high radiation. It was never meant to last forever. It was a temporary shield, built in emergency conditions to contain what remained of the reactor. But temporary solutions often remain for decades. By the 2000s, the old sarcophagus was deteriorating. There were fears it could collapse and release more radioactive dust. So a new structure was designed. The new safe confinement. A huge steel arch weighing tens of thousands of tons. It was built nearby and then moved over the old reactor in 2016. It became one of the largest movable structures ever created. Its purpose was to contain the radioactive remains and allow future dismantling work. The site is safer now than it was, but it is not safe in any ordinary sense. Some radioactive materials will remain dangerous for thousands of years. Chernobyl will outlive the Soviet Union by a very long time. Pripyat, meanwhile, became a ghost city. At first, after evacuation, it remained almost exactly as people had left it. Shops still had goods. Apartments still had furniture. Posters still hung on walls. Classrooms still had books. But then came time. Looters entered. Rain entered. Snow entered. Trees entered. Windows broke. Roofs leaked. Walls cracked. The city slowly surrendered. Today, Pripyat is visited by tourists, photographers, historians, and people searching for the strange feeling of a world interrupted. The amusement park, schoolrooms, hospital, apartment blocks, and empty avenues have become symbols of a frozen Soviet moment. A city once built to represent progress now represents warning. People come to see what happens when modern life stops suddenly, when homes are abandoned, when streets lose their voices, when nature grows through concrete. But Chernobyl is not only a place for dark tourism. It is a graveyard of decisions, a monument to secrecy, a lesson in technological arrogance, a reminder that modern systems can fail, and when they do, truth becomes as important as engineering. In 1988, on the second anniversary of the disaster, Valery Legasov, one of the leading Soviet scientists who investigated Chernobyl, took his own life. Before his death, he recorded tapes discussing the disaster, the failures behind it, and the culture of secrecy that had allowed danger to grow. Legasov had tried to reveal deeper truths, not only about operator error, not only about the events of one night, but about a system that hid design flaws, punished honesty, and preferred silence to accountability. Chernobyl damaged faith in Soviet authority. It showed weakness behind the image of control. It revealed that the state could not always protect its people. And worse, that it might not tell them the truth when they most needed it. Gorbachev later suggested that Chernobyl may have been one of the real causes of the collapse of the Soviet Union. That may sound dramatic, but disasters can destroy trust. And when trust is already fragile, a disaster can become a political earthquake. The economic cost was enormous. The cleanup, relocation, containment, health effects, lost land, lost productivity, and long-term management cost billions upon billions. But the moral cost was greater. Chernobyl revealed what happens when secrecy and technology meet catastrophe. It taught the world that nuclear power requires not only engineering, but honesty, training, preparation, emergency planning, transparency, respect for risk. After Chernobyl, the world looked differently at nuclear energy. Some countries slowed their nuclear programs. Anti-nuclear movements gained strength. Safety standards were reviewed. International cooperation improved. Yet nuclear power did not disappear. Reactors continued operating around the world. Some RBMK reactors were modified and remained in service. Nuclear power remains controversial. It produces large amounts of electricity with low carbon emissions. In many comparisons, it causes fewer deaths than fossil fuels like coal. But it carries risks that can be terrifying when systems fail. Chernobyl does not prove that all nuclear energy is impossible. But it proves that nuclear energy cannot survive lies, cannot survive arrogance, cannot survive poor design hidden by secrecy. It cannot survive a culture where workers are afraid to speak, officials are afraid to admit failure, and governments are afraid to tell citizens the truth. Years later, in 2011, Fukushima reminded the world that nuclear accidents are not only Soviet history. Fukushima and Chernobyl were both rated at the highest level of nuclear accident severity. But they were different disasters. Chernobyl released far more radiation into the open air, partly because the reactor had no proper containment structure. The health consequences in Japan were far more limited. Still, both events showed that modern societies must prepare for rare but severe technological disasters. Chernobyl remains unfinished. The reactor is sealed, but not gone. The exclusion zone is quieter, but not clean. The city is empty, but not forgotten. The victims are counted, but never completely. The liquidators are honored, but often too late. The truth is known, but still surrounded by debate. And the radiation remains. In soil, in forests, in buildings, in memory. The lesson of Chernobyl is not only about nuclear power. It is about truth. When danger is invisible, people must be able to trust those who measure it. When disaster happens, people must be told quickly. When science speaks, politics must not silence it. When lives are at risk, reputation must not matter more than survival. Chernobyl teaches that hiding a catastrophe does not make it smaller. It makes it deeper. It spreads the damage from the reactor into society itself. In the beginning, Soviet authorities tried to control the story, but radiation had already crossed borders. The truth had already entered the air, and no border guard, no censor, no official statement could stop it. Today, the forests around Chernobyl are quiet. The buildings of Pripyat stand empty. The Ferris wheel does not turn. Classrooms gather dust. Apartment windows stare over streets where children once played. The power plant stands beneath its enormous steel shelter. And beneath it, the remains of Reactor Number 4 still rest like a sealed warning. Chernobyl was a disaster made by human hands. By flawed design. By bad decisions. By unsafe procedures. By secrecy. By delay. By fear. But it was also answered by human courage. Firefighters who climbed into radiation without understanding the danger. Doctors who treated the dying. Pilots who flew over the burning reactor. Miners who dug beneath it. Soldiers and workers who cleared the most contaminated ground on Earth. Families who left their homes forever. Scientists who tried to tell the truth. Their story is part of Chernobyl too. Not only the failure, but the sacrifice. The invisible enemy was radiation. But the deeper enemy was silence. And in the end, silence failed. The world learned. Slowly. Painfully. Imperfectly. But it learned. Chernobyl reminds us that the future must be built with knowledge, humility, and honesty. Technology can light cities, can power nations, can shape the modern world. But when controlled by fear, secrecy, and pride, it can also turn a living city into a ghost. The past cannot be changed. Pripyat will not return to the morning before the evacuation. The firefighters will not come back. The families who lost their homes cannot recover the lives they left behind. But the story can still be remembered. And remembering matters. Because the next disaster, whatever form it takes, will ask the same question. Will people be told the truth in time? Chernobyl's answer was written in smoke, radiation, abandoned streets, and the quiet suffering of millions. It was a warning from the 20th century to every century that follows. The truth may be painful, but lies can be radioactive. And once released, their damage can last for generations.